Hi folks, today we're going to draw this little town map. It's about 5 or 6 hours of drawing time condensed down to about 10-15 minute video. So it's pretty sped up. I hope you can keep up. I've tried to commentate on what I've done throughout, but if you've got any questions, just pop them in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer them. There's a brush pack for Procreate in the comments as well. Get that. It does include a couple of your standard brushes, but they're just grouped together, all for ease of use. There's also a template Procreate file. I'm not sure the colors are quite right. I'm still learning video editing. The colors are a bit more natural in the finished picture. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. You ready to get going? Of course you are. First up, let's make a new canvas. I'm going to use A4. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to put the dimensions on the screen so you can see what I've done. And we'll just begin to sketch out everything using the 6B pencil, which is a standard brush, but it's in the brush pack that I've provided in the comments down below. Begin with the rough shapes, and then for trees, just use some circles. I like to bunch a load of circles together for the forests, and then spread a few out around the village. And you can begin to work into your details. Start with the houses, just draw little rectangles and squares, and then as they get a bit more developed, we can start working into those shapes. If you think about how villages were formed, they were usually formed around an amenity. So in this village, the main amenity is going to be the lake. I really like this 6B pencil brush. It sort of enables you to get your building square, and you can slowly use harder pressure to get your shapes more defined. On each of your little houses, don't forget to draw a chimney stack. I like to draw it as a little square on the edge, and usually a chimney would be offset towards the outside of the house. So that's why I've drawn them slightly off the edge on most. Some of them I've drawn them inside the lines. Once we're happy with our sketch, we can lower the opacity of the sketch layer, make a new layer and begin inking. Take one of the inking brushes. I'm using the MBO inker brush here, and I'm going to do the outlines at 5% size. If you're not sure about how to draw your buildings, keep it nice and simple. Often it can help to just look at a village map on Google Maps. For example, the manor house here, I took inspiration from a house that I used to play at when I was a little boy. When we draw the details on our houses, we're going to drop the brush size down to about 3%, just make it a little bit thinner. For the trees, we'll just draw a nice wavy little line around the circle. That's using the 5% size, and then we'll change the brush size down to 3% for the details inside. For the grass, we're going to use the MBO Grassy Ink brush at 3%, and we're going to be really gentle with how we draw lines. So we're going to flick the pen around very lightly on the canvas. It helps to make sure your areas of grass all link up, because they're going to be one section of green, so you need them to make sense. Where we draw grass next to the river, we're going to keep the tufts of grass a little bit off the lines of the edge of the river, and that will give the impression of a riverbank. We can also use the lines of grass to display contours. These show hills, so as we've got the top of a hill, we'll just draw some sort of circular lines around the edge of it. And then finally, we can add a little bit more detail just inside the edge of the grass. That gives it a feeling of being a bit more like a bank of grass. So for each of our main layers of colour, we're going to have one for path, one for grass, one for trees, one for houses. And what we'll do on each of these layers is just lay in a flat colour. Now we'll have the grass as the lowest level, and that can just be one blanket layer of colour. And then above that we'll put the paths, and unfortunately for the paths you have to fill these in by hand. I haven't found a better way of doing it, but you might have one. Using one of our inking brushes at about 3%, we can go through and add some details onto the roads. This again is just very loose pressure with the brush, nice and sketchy. Let your wrist sort of flick around quite a lot and you'll get nice details. For the soil, you can make another new layer above the grass, use a darker brown for this and just ink it all in. To add some shadow on the rooftops, make a new layer above your roof colour, set that to a clipping mask and multiply, and then using our gritty shader brush we can just take a medium grey and just run that over the edges that shouldn't get sunlight. To add highlights we'll do the same thing, but we'll make another layer above the roof colour, then we're going to add that as a soft light layer and we're going to choose white, and then with the gritty shader brush we'll just go in and add some white onto that layer. And then finally for shadows, we're going to make another layer, set that to multiply, and then with a medium grey, so around about 50% grey, and using one of the inking brushes, we can just go through and add shadow around each of the items where we know that the light is coming from the opposite direction. And don't forget to add some shadow to your chimneys. For tree shadow, I do the same thing, but I use the gritty shading brush. To add some dimension to your trees, make a new layer above the tree base colour, add it as a clipping mask and set it to multiply. And then I've used a green in this, but actually you should use a dark grey as it's a multiply. It will just make your green darker. So using your dark grey with the gritty shader brush, just run around the back edge where the light wouldn't be. So you know the edge furthest from the light. And then we'll do the same and add a highlight again. So above your shadows layer for the trees, add another layer, set it as a clipping mask, set it as soft light, and then with a white brush, very lightly using the gritty shading brush, just add a little bit of highlight to the front of each tree. Another trick I like to use is adding some shadow on the paths. So on our paths layer, make a new layer above that, set it as clipping mask and multiply, and then again with our 50% grey and our shading brush, just add a little shadow everywhere where the light wouldn't hit the path. That has the effect of lifting the grass off the path. For the soil, you can use multiply and soft light layers again, just to add some depth to those rows of plantings. So next up on shading the grass, just as we've done on all the other layers, we're going to make two layers above the grass base. So we're going to have a dark grass layer and then a grass highlight layer. The dark layer will be set as multiply, the highlight will be set as soft light. And then all we'll do is we'll take a darker green and the gritty shader brush, set it at a decent size and use very soft pressure and gradually work in shadows where the hills would be on the far side of the light. The darker you make the shadow, the more pronounced it's going to make the slope. I also use the shadows layer and a grey brush to add more depth to these grass layers. Now we'll just add a few final details. And make sure everything has a shadow. Here I went through and redid the highlights on my trees because I wasn't happy with them the first time around. And this is a little tent which is going to house a little sort of woods witch or fortune teller or something like that. Another nice trick that I think I saw first on one of Mike Schlee's maps is to add some smoke from the chimneys. So with the gritty shader brush, just lightly flick the pen away. Make sure they're all going in the same direction for each house because that's sort of where the prevailing wind would come from. For adding some depth to the water, we'll just make a new layer above the base layer of the water, add a slightly darker blue just with the gritty shading brush and just put it into the middle parts of the water just to give it some depth. Then on the same layer, with one of our inking brushes and the same sort of dark blue, we can just start to draw some wavy lines around the edge of the water. This layer should be set to multiply, and then above that we'll make another layer which is set to soft light, and we'll use a white colour, and then on the outside of each of those dark lines we've just drawn, we'll draw a light line as well, and that will give it a bit more depth. Finally, to make a night version very easily, just add another layer, set it as multiply, paint into it with dark blue, and then with an eraser tool, ideally I use the gritty shading brush here as the eraser, and then just erase that layer to make light shining off your buildings. I'm going to do a separate video on banners, but you can see what I do here, just make some nice curves. It's really easy, just try it out, I'd say. Alright, that was a long one. Thanks a lot for sticking around to the end. I've done a few little edits as you can see behind me. I've added a border, I've cropped it in a little bit. I've also completed the trees, but I didn't want to show you that because it would just bore you to death watching me do all those trees. We fiddled about with the banner a bit and added some text to it in Photoshop. My writing's terrible, so I couldn't do it by hand. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. I'll see you next time. Cheers.